It's the third game in a row where the Sacramento Kings have blown a big lead. This time they blow a 20-point lead at home against the New York Knicks, a complete collapse that is now becoming a habit for this Kings team. And no amount of draft lottery percentage points is going to make me or should make any Kings fan feel good about how these three games have gone, even with the Kings winning one of them in San Antonio. We'll talk about this epic collapse and more on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, as you cover the season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Been covering the Kings now for 8 seasons for ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And for those of you who are familiar with the Locked On Kings podcast and have listened to me before, you'll recognize that the energy is a bit lower. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you'll see I'm wearing a hoodie because I'm looking for any bit of comfort that I can after what the Kings have done to their fans for the last 3 games. And it's a very different tone from my post-game pod after the Kings blew a 19-point lead in their loss to the Dallas Mavericks the game before to wrap up their road trip. Even though the Mavericks were without Luka Doncic, it was a game where De'Aaron Fox went off for 44 points. And overall, I pulled more positives than negatives out of that game. There are no positives for me to pull out of this game. I tried my best trying to think of how much I could pull out of or put into the fact that this is the third game in a row where the Sacramento Kings have been able to build a big lead by really dominating the first half. 3 straight games where the Kings have been the best team in the first half by a wide margin, but none of that matters when you collapse 3 times in a row. And what we're seeing now is a habit being formed. If it happens twice, okay, that sucks, but hopefully that's just an anomaly. Now that it's 3 times, the difference between 3 times and 2 times in a row is monumental in my mind. And look, I understand. I've had this argument. We've hashed it out plenty of times here recently on the Locked On Kings podcast. I understand anybody and everybody who is listening who is a fan of the Kings losing games for the sake of draft lottery odds. I understand that completely, but let me tell you this as someone who gets the logic of that argument. No amount of percentage points, especially how minimal the percentage point differences are between 6 and 5 and at best 4, where the Kings can end up in their draft lottery odds standings. Those percentage points are not worth seeing this new, and I use air quotes there, new Sacramento Kings team develop a horrid habit of blowing big leads for the remainder of this season. The chances, even if they had won this game, even if they had beaten the Dallas Mavericks after losing to the New Orleans Pelicans a handful of games ago, the chances of the Kings making the play-in and therefore the playoffs were extremely low. It's not even about that anymore. What it's about is a team with a new core, a new identity, a team that sacrificed a high star potential player in Tyrese Halliburton at the trade deadline to make a win sooner, maybe not win now, but win sooner move in acquiring Domantas Sabonis, giving De'Aaron Fox, their recommitted star, a 2-time All-Star big man to pair with that he's never had before in his career. I want to see that team giving me a consistent reason to be excited and to actually believe that next season is going to be different. Because next season has to be different after making a trade like Monte McNair made at the trade deadline. Next season has to be different after pairing your star with a two-time All-Star and removing all excuses that he has left at this point in time. I get draft lottery odds being the better chance, giving the Kings the better chance to make the adjustments that they need to make this offseason to get to a better spot, to get to a place where we can consider them a legitimate playoff contender. I get that. But what I'm telling you is draft lottery odds, it's a game of luck. And there are no guarantees in the draft, as the Kings have proven time and time and time again. The one guarantee that we have right now with this Kings team is that Fox and Sabonis are a part of the team. That could change during the offseason, but I would be shocked to see that happen. The guarantee is that what's on the floor right now is real, and we want to see progress. And instead, what we're seeing is any little bit of progress that this Kings team makes by looking significantly better in the first half. And make no mistake about it, I want to try and be positive about these 3 straight first halves that we've seen out of the Kings, taking control, not only looking good on the offensive end, but playing solid defensively. Big explosive games from a guy like De'Aaron Fox against Dallas. I want to be positive against it, but it's impossible when if you take 2 steps forward, you take 3 massive steps back in the second half. And the fact that this continues to happen, regardless of who is on this roster, regardless of who is coaching this team, it is so unbearable from a Sacramento Kings fan perspective. Hell, it's unbearable for a Sacramento Kings media perspective because there are no answers left. The only thing that makes any logical sense is that it's a culture issue. And at this point, I don't know what you do to save this culture short of getting extremely lucky and putting together a group like what we saw in the late 90s and early 2000s that may as well, for the Kings organization, be considered once in a lifetime. Because with the exception of that golden stretch, the Sacramento Kings have been nothing short of garbage their entire existence in this city. There was a golden stretch that we all hang on to as tightly as we possibly can, myself included. A golden stretch that caused me to fall in love with the game of basketball. A golden stretch that dawned an era. Actually, that's not even true, because before that golden stretch, Sacramento Kings fans have always been showing up. Sacramento Kings fans have continued to support this team. You can question a million things about this Kings team. You cannot question fan support, which, once again, the Golden One Center, even though this Kings team is very much or pretty much out of this play-in race, this Kings or the Golden One Center was pretty full tonight. Very active crowd that had the wind completely taken out of their sails with what the Knicks did to the Kings, absolutely beating the Kings down and really massacring the Kings on their home floor in front of their fans in the second half. Why is it that Domantas Sabonis and Justin Holiday and Dante DiVincenzo come into Sacramento and become a part of a problem that has not gone away? We can't blame De'Aaron Fox for it all because he hasn't been here for it all. We can't blame Alvin Gentry for it all, or Luke Walton for it all, or even Monte McNair for it all. We can't, because it's been here regardless of who is in Sacramento. It is a culture problem that at this point in time, the Kings have to get lucky to fix. And it's a really hard and pessimistic, empty, depressing way of looking at where this Kings team is at. And I get they're trying to make moves, and I continue to support the trade for Domantas Sabonis. I still like that move by Monte McNair, but I like the move if the Domantas Sabonis from Indiana, who has made a two-time All-Star career, comes to Sacramento and continues to be that guy and doesn't get infected by this losing culture that has infected so many players, not just who have been traded here as veterans, but players who have come in as rookies who are excited for the chance to change this city, to be the guys here, and end up either getting the love of basketball pulled out of their souls, or they get traded away before that can happen. In the case of Tyrese Halliburton, it's exhausting to see the amount of teams since the Golden One Center has opened And that was 6 seasons or 5 seasons ago. This is the 6th season that the Golden One Center has been open. And I don't know this for sure, but it sure as hell feels like every other NBA team at one point in time has come into the Golden One Center and completely punked the Sacramento Kings. Completely punked the Kings. You know why? Because they know this Kings culture, as well as the fans who are in this building, know. Every team comes into Sacramento and especially offensively knows that they're going to get their opportunities. And every team comes into Sacramento knowing unless they are down by 50 points at the end of the first freaking quarter, and even then, they are not out of a game. The fact that it happens on the road, okay, I get that. A road crowd, or rather a home crowd for an opposing team, gets behind, like the Dallas Mavericks really rallied behind their fan base and the energy that they had in that game without Luka Doncic. That was a major reason why Dallas was able to complete that comeback. What's your excuse in Sacramento? The New York Knicks, from the other side of the country, came in and completely took over this game like they were up 30 in Madison Square Garden. And it's not the first time that the New York Knicks have done that. In fact, 2 seasons ago, the New York Knicks did that to the Kings when they were a significantly worse team. We saw the Brooklyn Nets, led by D'Angelo Russell, bring the Nets back from almost 30 down in a game similar to this to steal a win. How many times do we have to see it inside the Golden One Center, or see it, period? It's maddening. It's exhausting. And look, if you need to tell yourself that the Kings are intentionally losing games, that the only explanation for the Kings blowing 3 massive leads in a row is because they are intentionally doing it, if that is your coping mechanism, all power to you. You might want to turn the podcast off now or mute the next couple of minutes, because I am here to tell you that that is not the case. The Sacramento Kings aren't losing games intentionally, and to say so is giving them far too much credit. The Sacramento Kings are losing games because they suck. The Sacramento Kings are blowing 19-point leads twice in a row, followed by a 20-point lead at home, because they are a bad basketball team, that they are incapable of maintaining success over the course of the game. And a lot of times it is self-inflicted. Sure, Julius Randle went off for a career high, 48 points in this game or something like that? Julius Randle finished with, that's the first half numbers, 46 points. He had 13 at halftime. He finishes with 46 points on the night. Sure, Julius Randle got going, was hitting ridiculous shots. That's because he got swagger when he realized nobody in the city of Sacramento could stop him. But even before that, when the New York Knicks started coming back, it wasn't because offensively they suddenly came alive. It was because defensively the Kings are incapable of maintaining a consistent effort and a consistent success over a 48-minute game. And then offensively, the Kings go away from what's successful. And what's crazy, if you look at this box score and you just look at the offensive numbers for the Kings, with the exception of plus minuses, like offensively, the numbers aren't bad. You get 24 points on 18 shots, 10 of 18 shooting from De'Aaron Fox. Another 20-point game for him, in addition to 7 assists and 6 rebounds. That's a solid stat line for your starting point guard. You get 23 points from Harrison Barnes on 11 shots. An efficient game for him. 3 of 4 from three-point range. Got to the line 7 times, hit 6 of them. That's a good game for Harrison Barnes. Domantas Sabonis, another double-double. 19 points, 13 rebounds. We've seen the Kings win games when he's done less than that. Your big three, for lack of a better term, played well offensively. You had 5 players finishing in double-figure scoring, including 13 off the bench from Dante DiVincenzo and 10 off the bench from Davion Mitchell. Offensively, the Kings were having the time of their life in that first half, scoring 63 points. But then they go away from it. Why? Because they're not smart. This team has high basketball IQ players, individual high basketball IQs, but when they come together for some reason, regardless of who is in charge of this team, regardless of who is running this team, who's the leader of this team, because this has been a problem for more than just a couple of seasons, the Kings completely forget how to play their game. They get discombobulated, so much so they get to the point that Domantas Sabonis said at the in the post-game press conference tonight that they completely give up. He said the Kings gave up in the second half. A team in a play-in race gave up at home in front of their fans after leading by 20 points. They gave up in the second half and got their asses handed to them and got embarrassed, not for the first time, not for the second time. It sounds like a LeBron James thing. Not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6. The Kings have been embarrassed this way way too many times to count over the course of this season. And even when new guys are coming in with all-star pedigree, they fall right into the same cycle. Is it our water? Is it if you walk into the Kings locker room and put on a Kings jersey, it's like the Monstars, suddenly all the not necessarily the skill, the talent isn't sucked out of you, but your basketball IQ is, your ability to put together 48 minutes of a good game? It just doesn't make sense. Does not make sense. And by the way, Domantas Sabonis was ejected in this game. It's the first time he's been ejected in his career. So all the years that he had in Indiana, he was fine, never got ejected. Comes to Sacramento within a handful of games, he gets his first ejection. And he might be missing the next game against, I think it's the Denver Nuggets, because after he was ejected, or before really, he got his second technical foul, he actually bumped into the official. Now, looking back at the tape, he didn't shoulder check him. It wasn't malicious, but there was contact. And anytime there's contact between a player and official, it usually doesn't go too well for the player. Certainly he will be fined, but who knows if he'll be available for the Denver Nuggets game. Not that it matters that much because the Kings season's over. That being said, I still want to see the Kings do enough during this season to make me excited about this offseason. Because at this point in time, the wind that was in my sails after the 44-point performance from De'Aaron Fox, the wind that was in my sails after the acquisition of Domantas Sabonis and the flashes, especially early on, that those two showed together, the ball movement, the improved rebounding, the somewhat improved defense, all that wind is gone. Now I'm sitting with no wind in the middle of a bottomless, endless ocean with no land in sight. And it's a very familiar position for Kings fans. Very familiar. You know, there was a joke going around on social media, and there was an actual conversation on the broadcast tonight. What did Tom Thibodeau say to the New York Knicks to change this second half for this kind of effort to happen? Well, I have a joke response to that actually is true. And I'll tell you that response. Plus, we'll talk about the ridiculous numbers when it comes to what the Kings were able to do in the first quarter and then what the Kings gave up defensively in the second through fourth quarters. That's all coming up in the next segment after I tell you about Built Bar. And thank goodness for Built Bars. I'm immediately following this podcast before going to bed, going to go and get a Built Bar because I need the comfort food. And the best thing about a Built Bar is not only does it taste like a candy bar, not only has it replaced candy bars for me, covered in 100% chocolate, it is good for me. So I get my comfort, but I don't have to feel bad about it after I finish it. Built Bars, they're healthy, covered, like I said, in 100% chocolate. There's so many different flavors for you to try. My favorite is mint brownie, and I have a full box just of mint brownie bars that are in my cupboard right now. These bars are 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. Compare that to most candy bars that are 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs. It's way better on all levels. There's mint brownie, coconut almond, and for new this month, white chocolate cookies and cream that I just tried for the first time yesterday. And oh boy, is it good. I'm calling it the Jason Williams bar. Old OG Kings fans knowing Jay Will's white chocolate will remember that. They're all delicious. New flavors are coming out all the time for you to try. And if you think there would be a flavor that they haven't made that would be good, either eventually they will make it or they're always open to suggestions. And when they do make it, it'll be delicious and good for you. Go to built.com right now to check out all the flavors, to order a mixed box, to try a bunch of them, or you can order your own custom boxes. Whatever you order, make sure you use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. What did Tom Thibodeau say to the New York Knicks in the locker room to inspire their 83-point, I believe it was 83-point second half? Was it some engaging, passionate speech that we see in sports movies? Did he not talk to them at all and make them feel so bad that they took the floor and wanted to show up and not let their head coach down? No. I have no idea what Tom Thibodeau said, but I know what I would have said if I was in his place. Guys, we're getting our asses kicked, but you know what? It's the Sacramento Kings, so we're going to be just fine. I'm being facetious. It's a joke. But at the same time, it's kind of not, because I genuinely believe teams feel that way at times. If a team goes down by 10 points to the Sacramento Kings, they know that in a matter of seconds, they can be right back in it. Meanwhile, most of the time when the Kings go down by 10 points, the game might as well be over, it feels like, from time to time. Now, the Kings have come back from big leads before this season. Not that they were able to actually close it out and win the game like the Kings have happened to them way too often. But it's to this point where it's comical how often games like these have happened in recent seasons, but over the course of this playoff drought. Once again, suggesting that it's a culture problem. And speaking of coaching, I appreciated Alvin Gentry after the game talking about the difference in halves, because, of course, the first half was, Gentry said, and I kind of agree with him, one of the best halves the Kings have had all season long. Look, they're up 63-48. Just holding the Knicks to 48 points in the first half, that's a win after holding them to 17 points in the first quarter. Julius Randle only has 13 points, is a minus 19 on 6 of 14 shooting. You're not really getting killed by anyone else. Quickly had 11 points. RJ Barrett had 15. So the Knicks were fine, but for the most part, you were in control. You were forcing them to take a lot of shots. They were shooting 36% from the field. More importantly, the Kings usually get killed on the perimeter, and the Knicks were shooting 21% from three-point range. That was at halftime. Second half, the Knicks end up finishing the game shooting 51% from the field, 42% from three-point range. In one half, the Knicks went from 21% to 42%. They doubled their three-point percentage after taking 19 threes in the first half. That shouldn't be possible in the NBA. And yet against the Kings, it's probable. Some of these numbers are baffling. Just the number alone, where the Kings gave up 17 points in the first quarter and then gave up a combined 114 points in the final three quarters. That alone is staggering. But somehow, with how bad the Kings are defensively, not a single Kings fan is surprised by it. There are going to be people nationally who haven't watched a second of Kings basketball, who know the Kings suck defensively, who will look at those numbers and go, damn, I didn't even realize the Kings could do that. I didn't realize any team could do that. Is that a typo? No, it's not. That's Kings basketball. Alvin Gentry is well respected. Great guy. He has no chance of being the Kings head coach next season. Like, if he at this point is involved in the process, meaning he has a chance to interview for the position, he's the interim head coach right now, taking over for Luke Walton. If he has a chance at the Kings or being the Kings head coach next season and beyond, it's ceremonial. You're doing it out of goodwill for the man, for his reputation, for sticking around through the hell that has been the remainder of this season. But Alvin Gentry is no way going to be the Kings head coach after this season. No way. No chance. And it's harsh to say, because it sounds like I'm saying it's his fault. He certainly hasn't helped things, but I don't know who the Kings can hire this offseason to help these issues. Like I said, it just feels like the Kings have to put together the right combination and just get freaking lucky. Hell, find a way to turn back the clock on Rick Adelman 10 years, see if you can bring him to Sacramento. And I don't even know if he, the legendary Rick Adelman, could save this organization from how bad they've been since they fired him in 2006. I wish Alvin Gentry the best. I'm going to be rooting for him for the remainder of the season. There's no chance. There's no chance he comes back. I want to know where you're at this point in time, because as you can tell from me, I'm just, it's a not surprised perplexiveness. And maybe that's not even possible. Like I'm not surprised that it's the Kings that are doing this. It doesn't seem impossible for the Kings to have moments like this so consistently. But even so, when you're experiencing it, it feels real. It's like an out-of-body experience as a fan. And I imagine there were a lot of those happening actually inside the Golden One Center tonight. Fans going, did I fall asleep and then wake up a month later to a completely different Kings team wearing the same numbers, looking the exact same, coming out in the second half and forgetting how to play basketball. That's what it looked like. This Kings team and their inability to put together a 48-minute consistent performance more than once in a blue moon is shocking. Shocking at this point. You'd think the Kings would trip and fall into better overall performances more than they have this season. And with the exception of a handful of a few, most of the time it's when offensively they have one of those nights where they just can't miss. This team is just incapable of putting together even close to a full game of solid game basketball, other than individual performances like the 44 points from De'Aaron Fox in Dallas. But where are you at? If you can find a way to still celebrate the Kings losing this game and maintaining their hold on the sixth spot and even closing the gap slightly with the Indiana Pacers for that fifth spot with draft lottery odds. If that's you, I admire you. And I'm glad you're able to pull some positivity out of this. And I admire your mental health. I had therapy today. Believe it or not, that's not a joke. I had therapy today. And my therapist could have told me this happens because my therapist mocks me for my job covering the Kings and for being a Kings fan every single day. And he's lived in Sacramento almost his entire life. So he understands what's going on. I recommend therapy to all Kings fans. I recommend therapy to all people, but especially Kings fans, because it's an abusive relationship that we've all been in with this Kings organization over the last 16 seasons. And I'm praying that 17 will be different. And the Kings still have time for the remainder of this season to reignite my optimism that was just here yesterday. But as of right now, that flame is snuffed out. And I'm tired even thinking about trying to relight it. But let me know where you're at. If you firmly believe the Kings are tanking, enjoy your fantasy world. Because the Kings are not trying to lose. They're just losing because they're bad. Really bad. Even with Domantas Sabonis here, this Kings team is still really bad. And Monty McNair has a lot of work to do this offseason. Again, let me know where you're at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And if you need to send me audio clips, you need to send me just long emails, just venting and getting it all out, I'm here for you. I'm here for you, and I will try my best to engage as many of you in conversations like that as I possibly can. Because nights like this, no matter what mental state you're in and what level of disinterest you have in this Kings team, nights like this for any sports fan are difficult to follow or swallow. Difficult indeed. What's not difficult, though, is using BetOnline to make money on games like this that just seem to keep happening for your Sacramento Kings. I know some people never want to bet against their team, but if you used your money to bet against the Kings consistently this season, you probably would be significantly richer than when you were or what you were at in October. BetOnline is the number one place for the latest odds, totals, player performance props, where the next head coach is going to land even. BetOnline is the best spot for all of your sports betting needs, period, with basketball, pro, and college in full swing. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball, of course. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds. If baseball ever comes back, you can bet on baseball games there. Professional soccer, you can bet on there as well. And when football season's happening, of course, football action there as well. They have it all. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. So now, where do the Kings go from here? What do the Kings do now? It sounds cliche, but it's really just on to the next one. Like after games like this, of course, the Kings need to look long and hard, whether it's at film, in the practice facility, coaches' huddles, a private team or players-only meeting, whatever the hell it is. The Kings need to look closely at why they're blowing big leads consistently and show that they can build and maintain a big lead. If they're able to do that more than a couple of times for the remainder of the season, I'll feel a whole hell of a lot better than I do right now. And really, to me, that should be the goal for the Kings for the remainder of the season. Forget playing, forget draft lottery odds. Show that you can correct an obvious mistake. Show that you can improve. You can build upon it even when the games are meaningless. And that takes continued effort and a continued buy-in from De'Aaron Fox, from Domantas Sabonis, the main stars who are being paid a boatload of money, who can obviously look at the rest of the season and go, well, there's not much for me to play for. No, there's a lot for you to play for when it comes to this offseason and next season. The Kings need to prove to all of us that they can build and maintain big leads. Show the level of focus required. And if the way you get yourself to do that is by playing spoiler, by taking on teams who are in playoff pictures or in a playoff position, who are maybe jockeying for a better seed or who need a win or two to boost their chances. Maybe it's a play-in team. Regardless, play spoiler. If that's what you need to do to motivate yourself to care about these games, do that. Because if we see a Kings team that continues to try and win, but quits halfway through the game like they've done, not just tonight, but in recent games, I tell you what, there is not going to be much faith on my end for anything the Kings do this offseason for improving the team so much so that I believe the clear goal of making the playoffs next year is even remotely attainable. No matter what the Kings do this offseason, making the goal or making the playoffs next year is already a permanent set in stone goal. They have to. But that doesn't mean that I have to believe that they're going to accomplish that. They need to prove to themselves, their fans, Monty McNair needs to prove to himself and needs to have an idea of what he needs to do to get the team there based off of these final 16 or so games that the Kings have. Again, I want to hear from you. At Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. If you need to vent, bring it on. We'll get through it. We'll get through it together. We've been through a lot this season. We've been through a lot over these 16 seasons. I've been through a lot over the 8 seasons that I've been hosting Locked On Kings. Or rather, 8 seasons I've been covering the Kings, but the 5, now 6 seasons that I've been hosting Locked On Kings. Added to the list. Our persistence continues. Thank you so much for listening to the Locked On Kings podcast today. Can't wait to have you join me for the next episode. If you'd like to leave a review of the podcast, if you haven't already, please do that. Apple Podcast or iTunes, best place to do that. You can also, if you listen on Spotify, there's now a rating system on Spotify. Hit 5 stars there. Really would appreciate it. Continue to reach out and really let me know where you want the Kings to go from here. Because there's a lot of routes that they can take, and I don't know if any one of them is right. But you tell me what is right for you as a fan, what you need as a fan for the remainder of this season. Appreciate your support as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.